Well, I don't know how many times I've had to bang on about this. Lefties, stop kowtowing to China, or what they would call managing the relationship. It sounds so pleasant. Penny Wong, one of the leading advocates of this, lashed out at the PM for supposedly undermining our relationship with Beijing today. She's come out with some outlandish accusation that Morrison is actually stoking tensions with China for his own political gain.
Too much of the discussion on China is frenzied, afraid and lacking context. And this has been made so much worse by a Prime Minister who is only interested to the extent it offers him political value. My concern is that not only does he not fully comprehend Australia's interests in relation to China, he doesn't even seek to. As with anything else and everything else, he only seeks to understand his political opportunity.
Now look, I know that Penny Wong doesn't listen to too many people, but could someone please tell her that maybe, just maybe, China is doing things itself that are causing the problems here? Try this. A senior member of the CCP think tank has claimed that China won a biological war against the US in 2020. I told you about that in the opening. Listen in for what this senior researcher at Peking University, Chen Ping, had to say.
2020年，中国打赢贸易战、科技战，尤其是生物战的成就，是历史上前所未有的，划时代的。
Now, the subject of China and our national interest actually galvanises an odd coalition on occasions. You find Labor, Liberal, Independent senators and others, and members of Parliament, all getting together, even a Green commentator on occasions, to say we've got to be careful about what is happening to protect ourselves from the Chinese rapacious approach to our region and our nation. Tonight, I'm delighted to say I am joined by two people who have concerns in this space, former Labor Senator Stephen Conroy and Rex Patrick, the Independent Senator from South Australia. Welcome, gentlemen. Stephen, let me start with you. You've been a long advocate for Australia participating in the right of navigation through the South China Sea. America's done that in the last week or so for another time. Has Australia taken up your advice yet?
Well, I think Australia certainly lifted its game in the South China Sea. We've been engaged in flights. I don't know at this stage, and unlike the Americans who publicise their activities so they're transparent about it, Australia doesn't traditionally. But whenever I've seen these questions come up, the government have always said we've never gone within the 12-mile limits. We've never overflown some of these fake islands that have been created. They've not gone that step of sailing through as close as some of the Americans have. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The Americans have got far more ability to take the sort of retribution that China will dish out if you're so openly defiant. But having said that, despite the fact that we've not been breaching those innermost circles, the Chinese are still challenging our ships, and they're still disrupting our flights. There's stories of people being questioned, other planes questioning our planes. There's stories about how they've put lasers onto the planes, meaning into the pilot's eyes, this sort of stuff to disrupt them from some of the ships that have been below. So the Chinese are fighting in what they, is now being referred to as the grey zone, which is not actual, firing a missile, but doing everything else. So at the same time as they're doing that to Australia, they've got 200 so-called Coast Guard, which are really just their navy painted white, trying to enforce their position against the Philippines. They've forced an oil rig that was in Vietnamese claimed waters. They've forced it back to shore. So they are engaged in a very, very significant amount of pressure on all the countries in the region, which is why it's so important for everybody to hang together.
And Rex Patrick, Stephen makes a very good point. It's all the countries in the region, but it includes Australia. And I didn't want to put Stephen on the spot about this, but I'm going to ask you, is Penny Wong really off the reservation here in saying it's basically Australia's fault and we're prompting this response from China when China is clearly in an aggressive and expansionist mode and they're boasting about this biological warfare?
Look, Corey, you have to go on the facts, and Stephen's laid out some of them. We also see almost daily incursions in Taiwanese airspace. We've seen the air defence zone that they put up a number of years ago. There's also a range of things that we see taking place in China that we're uncomfortable with: the genocide against the Uyghurs, the repression in Hong Kong in terms of freedoms. We've got Australians that have been arbitrarily detained in China. And then, of course, we see what's happening on our own shores with political interference, cyber attacks, and the like. So there is a change in environment, and we do need to recognise that. Look, there are many things that Penny Wong said in her speech that are correct. However, I think she pulls her punches. What she hasn't said is what Labor would do were they to get into government. For example, in relation to the 14 demands that China has suggested that we need to kowtow to. They're questions that need to be answered. I think the Chinese government would prefer a Labor government in power after the next election, and we have to ask the right questions. What part of our national interests would be sold in order to kowtow to some of the Chinese demands? And she didn't answer any of those questions.
Okay, well, that's a good question for you, Stephen Conroy. If Labor were to get into power at the next election, what part of the Chinese demands would Labor succumb to?
Well, look, firstly, just to respond, Penny's speech is actually quite a well thought through speech. I think you've cherry-picked a couple of parts of it, Corey, without acknowledging that she listed in much the same way I did a range of Chinese aggressions. So she didn't ignore China's behaviour. She in fact called out some of Chinese behaviour. Where I would probably disagree on an emphasis with Penny is that I don't think it matters what Australia's tone is. China could not care. And this is where it's really hard for a whole group of Australians who have worked closely with China in the past. China don't care what you think. They don't care what the government thinks. They have their plan, they are implementing their plan, and they are going to do it whether Australia says in a loud way, a soft way, or no way when we call them out.
And that's
so
that's
Penny's
Stephen.
speech.
Yeah, sorry, Stephen. That is an excellent point. I'm a bit pushed for time. So I want to get this response from Rex. China do not care a hoot about what Australia thinks of them, and yet our media over here and our politicians often say, oh, we've got to be worried about offending China, which is the interpretation I got from Penny's speech. Isn't it time that we stop giving a hoot what they had to say, Rex?
Well, look, I think we do need to recognise that they are a power in the region. We do need to interact with them. We do conduct trade with them, but we also need to understand, as you've pointed out, as both you and Stephen have pointed out, that they are playing a geopolitical game as they grow, becoming an economic power, and there's very little that Australia can do. In all responses to China, and this is starting to happen, we need to act multilaterally. We need to work with our friends in Asia, our friends in the United States, our friends in Europe to respond to what's happening. And there is some hope that is starting to happen.
Yeah, I think there's a unity ticket on that. Former Senator Stephen Conroy and Senator Rex Patrick, thanks so much for your insights tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.